Daniel is my brother. Steady, practical, the kind of man who irons his shirts on Sunday because he thinks it honors the week. For 18 years, I watched him try to be the fulcrum of a house that kept tipping. That's what a long marriage with Claire looked like for us. A series of tiny midwifings, so the whole thing didn't collapse in one loud, miserable heap. Claire is magnetic in that hazardous way. Beautiful, funny when she wanted to be, and devastatingly selfish when she wasn't. Alcohol did what alcohol does. It blurred lines, rewired promises into excuses. There were years of tiptoeing around late-night bottles, of locked medicine cabinets and whispered fights in the car after the kids had been put to bed. I argued with Daniel about it. God, did we argue. I told him he was being kind to a fault. He called me cruel. Sometimes I thought I hated Claire. More often, I hated the version of Daniel who believed things could be fixed by patience alone. The fights weren't fireworks. They were attrition. Claire would apologize on Monday, charm everyone at a PTA meeting on Tuesday, and vanish into a blackout the following Friday. Daniel would keep showing up for school concerts, doctor's appointments, birthday cakes. He would mortgage small things, a roof repair, new tires, then therapy, then rehab, because the house had to keep standing, even if the rooms were empty of trust. One winter, I watched him hand over the last chunk of savings for Claire's inpatient rehab, $25,000. He counted the bills like a man pinching a raw nerve. He told me, "If this doesn't work, I don't know what I'll do." I tried to say something brave. I told him there is a point where love becomes a job. He looked at me with those tired, patient eyes and asked me to help him be brave instead. So I did. For him, for my niece and nephews, for the illusion that family was a thing you could glue back together. Rehab seemed to hold, for a while. Claire came home like someone on probation, smiling, measured, handing us receipts for meetings, and handing me a casserole dish with perfect timing. We let our guard down. I let mine down. We all carried the belief we wanted to carry, that this was the reset. The house leaned in one way, and for the first time in years, it leaned the other. Then Daniel found the hotel receipt. He was sorting mail, a tired, ordinary Sunday chore, when he went very quiet and folded the paper wrong. He called me into the kitchen like it was something trivial. "Em? Did you order the storage unit?" I should have been less casual. When I saw the name on the receipt, the hotel on a Wednesday night, the town we didn't go to, I felt the old tilt return, only sharper. Claire's betrayal was blunt instead of elegant. Daniel discovered she'd been sleeping with someone who should have been helping her stop, her addictions counselor, Dr. Mark Havel. I heard the syllables and my stomach gave a small, ugly lurch. Mark had been their supposed savior figure, licensed, respectable, a man who lectured on boundaries and recovery at local hospitals. To sleep with a patient is not just infidelity. It's a professional collapse of everything that makes a counselor trustworthy. The violation was doubled and tripled and humming in every room. Daniel came to me that night after Claire had gone to bed. He sat at the kitchen table like a man who'd been given a strange, unwanted inheritance. Evidence. He placed the receipt and a few other scraps on the table like they were artifacts from someone else's life. "I paid $25,000 for her to get better," he said quietly, "and she traded it for someone who wrote her therapy notes." I'd yelled at him sometimes. I'd told him leaving would be the loving thing for himself and for the kids. But when I saw him then, the anger in my chest had nothing to do with telling him what to do. It was simple. Animal. I wanted him safe. I wanted the kids safe. I wanted the facade burned down so we could rebuild something that didn't smell like fear. He didn't want dramatic exits or messy late-night confrontations. He wanted control. He wanted to be the one to say when the house stopped being their house and became his again. "I'm not walking away with nothing, Em," he said, and I believed him. It wasn't bitterness driving him so much as a tired, practical kind of fury. The sort that counts the dollars and the custody arrangements and the long-term temperature of a life. He had paid in money, time, and dignity. He had paid in missing what his kids needed of him because he was always putting out the next flare-up. We argued about tactics for hours that week. I told him to be careful with lawyers. I told him not to get baited into an ugly public fight. He told me he didn't want to punish Claire so much as make sure this never happened to someone else under the guise of therapy. When he said that, I saw the real thing he was after. Not vengeance for its own sake, but a kind of justice that would protect other people. And maybe, if we were honest with ourselves, protect him from ever being that gullible again. So he began to move with a measured kind of purpose. No yelling at restaurants, no bleeding on the kitchen floor of mutual friends. He quietly started collecting things: hotel receipts, a suspiciously generous restaurant charge, a folded note from Claire that turned into an exhibit. He didn't do it to humiliate her. He did it to make sure the truth could not be waved away as he said, she said. He wanted facts. He wanted testimony. He wanted the kind of leverage that holds weight in a courtroom and in a boardroom. I didn't know then exactly what role I would play. I only knew I would stand in the doorway and hand him the flashlight when he asked for it. Watching him set the trap, calm, meticulous, the opposite of the chaos Claire embodied, I felt the tilt of the house begin to right itself. It was not a happy righting. It was a stubborn, necessary one. When I left that night, after duct taping receipts into envelopes like some small, respectable evidence kit, I felt something shift under my ribs. Hope, maybe, or a very pragmatic sort of relief. Daniel had decided he wouldn't just walk away. He was going to end things on his own terms. And for the first time in years, I believed him. I'm not a lawyer. I'm a librarian who can find a book on anything and smell the plot twist from 3 shelves away. But I'm good at noticing the small, ordinary things people leave behind. An emailed confirmation on a family tablet, a crumpled receipt in the glove compartment, the way someone's calendar starts to carve out nights that weren't there before. Those are the things that become facts if you hold them up under light. So when Daniel said, "Find me someone who knows how to turn facts into a net," I introduced him to Mara Voss. Mara is sharp, the way a scalpel is sharp, polite, efficient, and a little frightening if you're the sort of person who thinks negotiation is a personality trait. I told her what I'd seen at holiday dinners, what I'd overheard in the kitchen at midnight, and what little paper ghosts Claire had left lying around. Mara listened and then began to see the architecture of an argument where I had only seen chaos. Mara's first question, the one that mattered more than any other, was about prior complaints. "Has anything gone to a regulatory board?" she asked, and I almost laughed because that one tiny fact would change everything. Daniel had been methodical. He'd filed a complaint with the State Board of Health Professions before we had even filed for divorce, mostly because it felt like the right kind of blow. Public, administrative, and painfully concrete. It wasn't a petty social media smear. It was a formal accusation that could pull a professional's license if proven. Mara's eyes lit up. "Good," she said. "That changes the leverage entirely." I don't know if Claire knew what kind of leverage she was playing with when she demanded an extravagant payout and threats that read like revenge fantasies in a prenuptial clause. I do know that when people think they've cornered you, they usually start asking for the moon. Claire's lawyer negotiated hard for a non-disparagement clause. They wanted Daniel shackled from saying a thing. They drafted language meant to seal mouths and mute legal recourse. But lawyers are human and sometimes impatient, and Claire's counsel made a fatal assumption that Daniel had nothing beyond social chatter to bring to a hearing. They never asked whether he had already lodged a formal complaint with the licensing board. That was the oversight Mara set a harvest on. Because a subpoena from the board isn't a neighborly request. It's a legal demand. It trumps private contractual gagging. It's the sort of mechanism in the law that assumes the public interest in stopping malpractice outweighs an ex-spouse's desire for silence. While Mara was mapping legal leverage, I was doing what I do, collecting the little breadcrumb trail of proof. I didn't hack phones or stage confrontations. I paid attention. I'd noticed a whole confirmation tucked under a grocery list in Claire's purse when I'd offered to drop off soup after a surgery. I'd seen a credit card charge attributed to a restaurant 2 towns over. The same night, a therapy appointment was marked on Claire's phone. I'd taken photos, made copies, and slid them into an envelope labeled in my tidy handwriting, "For Mara." There are ways to make loose threads look like a rope when you weave them with intention. Mara wove them into a complaint that read like a careful, undeniable story. Dates, locations, receipts, and the pattern of a counselor who had violated the foundational boundary of his profession. We sent it in. From there, timing was everything. In court, Claire softened her stance. Maybe she believed Dr. Mark could keep a job. Maybe she thought we wouldn't follow through. Maybe she just wanted the fastest route to cash. Whatever the reason, her demands shrank. Daniel negotiated calmly, and against everything the part of me that expected melodrama had prepared for, kept the house. He got custody of the 3 kids, the ones who liked cereal with too much milk and argument-free bedtimes, and secured child support. It wasn't about destroying Claire. It was about making sure the kids had stability, and making sure Daniel had the means to be the dad he was finally committed to being. When the state board sent their subpoena, I remember Daniel standing straighter than I'd seen him in years. The subpoena was a victory and a risk. A victory because it meant our complaint was taken seriously. A risk because testifying would drag the family story into an official hearing. He could have refused. He could have taken the settlement and stayed silent. Instead, he obeyed the subpoena. The law does, in its slow and sometimes clumsy way, believe in accountability. I sat in the back of the hearing room like an embarrassed stage parent and watched a man I loved answer questions with the quiet arithmetic of someone who'd been paying attention all along. The board didn't gush. They did what regulatory boards do. They examined the facts against the standards and said in very formal language that this crossed the line. Mark Havel was stripped of his license and added to the register of sanctioned health professionals. He tried to argue, to explain, to claim misread boundaries and consenting adults, but the pattern of receipts, the appointment logs, and the corroborating testimony were a cold geometry that left little space for stories. When you take someone's profession away, you take more than income. You take the scaffolding that holds up their identity. We had not wanted to ruin anyone unless they ruined themselves. Mark's choices had already done that work. In the months that followed his license removal, his practice collapsed. Patients left. Offers dried up. Lawyers billed. Slowly, inexorably, the money disappeared. His mother's estate, something we hadn't expected, delayed the inevitable, but not forever. People with no income and no professional letters after their name find their marriages strained in ways that honest misunderstandings rarely cause. Claire stayed with him while the money lasted. The house felt less like an altar to love and more like an account balance being bled dry. Eventually, she left him. It's a strange thing to feel satisfied at the end of someone's unraveling, and also hollow, like watching a storm pass and realizing the town still needs rebuilding. The kids came to stay with Daniel more and more. They started making rubber band towers and homework piles in the sunlight that finally reached the living room. He was present in ways that had been hard to predict after so much absence. When the dust settled and the boards signed off and the lawyers sent their last bills, I sat at Daniel's kitchen table with a cup of coffee that had gone cold and felt a small domestic peace press against the edges of my chest. None of it was pretty. None of it was simple. We'd used the rulebook to do something that felt, in the end, like the right kind of ruthless. Protect the children, strip away the field where predatory behavior could hide, and give Daniel back the dignity of being the one to set the terms for his life. I won't pretend the moral calculus was neat. There was a cheap thrill in the way Mark's name stopped opening doors. There was also the slow, unpleasant knowledge of how many lives had been upended when those doors slammed. I don't believe in gleeful ruin. I believe in accountability. I believe in being clever enough to use the system when the system is the thing that can stop someone doing harm. We traded evidence with one other person who'd been burned by Mark, his other wife, the woman who'd been his spouse before Claire's affair came into existence. Her receipts helped us. Our hotel bills helped her. The exchange was practical and unromantic. It wasn't revenge for revenge's sake. It was 2 people clearing the wreckage so they could start again. Justice, the kind that looks like cold paperwork and careful testimony, was served. The house kept its roof. The kids had guardians who could breathe again. Daniel stopped carrying the weight he'd been told was love and started carrying something simpler: responsibility. When I tucked the last bit of evidence into the file and labeled it closed, I thought of all the tiny good decisions that add up to a life not being ruined. I thought of holidays in the future where the kids might argue about mashed potatoes and not about whether Dad had come home. I thought of Mara, efficient and a little ruthless in her own right, and how grateful I was to have met someone who read the rule book like a weapon for good. We'd set the trap, and it had worked. It didn't feel triumphant. It felt necessary,